The C-17 Globemaster, a cavernous gray beast of the sky, vibrated with a low, bone-deep hum that rattled Caleb Jensen's teeth and resonated in his chest. For 15 months, the defining sounds of his life had been the crackle of a radio, the distant thud of artillery, and the high-pitched whine of sandstorms against metal. Now, this monotonous drone was a hymn of return, the final resonant chord in the symphony of his third deployment. He pressed his forehead against the small, thick window, watching the aircraft descend through a dense blanket of pearlescent clouds that obscured the world below. The arid, sun-bleached landscapes of Bagram, a world of dust that coated the tongue and mountains that stood like jagged, indifferent sentinels, were finally, blessedly, receding into memory. In their place, his mind, starved for color, painted vivid, lush images of his small Ohio town, emerald green lawns slick with morning dew, the deep umber of the familiar oak tree in their front yard, the impossible blue of a summer sky free from the haze of conflict. His thumb and forefinger, calloused and rough, nervously and almost unconsciously traced the sharp, reassuring corners of the velvet box tucked deep in his utility pocket. It felt like a foreign object against the worn fabric of his uniform. Inside, a simple, elegant diamond ring rested in its satin bed. It was more than a piece of jewelry. It was a tangible representation of a promise, a vow he had rehearsed 1,000 times in the suffocating dark of his bunk, under the cold, indifferent sprawl of the Afghan stars. It was the anchor for the future he had clung to with every fiber of his being. He had been gone for 15 agonizingly long months, an eternity measured in moments of sheer terror and mind-numbing boredom. What was supposed to be a standard year-long tour had been mercilessly extended by the unpredictable tides of conflict, by shifting front lines and the brutal, unyielding reality of their mission. 15 months felt like a lifetime stolen from him, a lifetime he was now coming to reclaim. It was a lifetime measured in crackling, frustratingly delayed satellite calls, where Clara's voice was a ghostly, precious echo, and in letters that arrived weeks after they were sent, their pages softened by travel, still carrying the faint, intoxicating scent of her perfume. Her words, chronicling the quiet, mundane life he so desperately missed, had been his shield and his sanctuary. She wrote of a persistently leaky faucet that had finally been conquered, a small but meaningful promotion at the local library where she worked, and the slow, deliberate turning of the seasons back home. It was this profound, beautiful normalcy that kept him tethered to the world he was fighting to return to. He had saved every letter, every last one, storing them in a waterproof pouch like sacred texts. They were the bricks with which he would build the foundation of their future. The massive aircraft touched down on the runway at Travis Air Force Base with a jarring shudder and the screech of protesting tires. A collective, audible sigh of weary relief rippled through the soldiers, a sound of profound release. Caleb's heart, a frantic drum against his ribs, seemed to want to escape his chest. He was stateside. He was safe. The air he was breathing was American air. He was only a few hours and one connecting flight away from seeing her. He had told Clara, in their last brief, crackling conversation, that his return was scheduled for the end of the month. It was a small white lie, a harmless deception designed to orchestrate the surprise of a lifetime. He could picture her face with painful clarity, the initial flicker of confusion in her blue eyes, then the slow widening of them as recognition dawned, the shock melting into a torrent of tears of unrestrained joy as he stood on their doorstep, a ghost made flesh returned to life from a world away. After the endless bureaucratic shuffle of processing, medical checks, and debriefings, he finally found himself in a taxi, the civilian clothes feeling strange and ill-fitting on his body. He watched the familiar green of the American Midwest blur past the window, a sight so rich and alive it was a balm to his soul. Every exit sign, every familiar chain restaurant, was a milestone bringing him closer. He watched the suburban houses flick past, their windows glowing with warm, inviting light, each one a small universe of peace and family. Soon, one of those lights would be his. He leaned his tired head against the cool glass of the window, the bone-deep exhaustion of the past year and a half finally settling into his marrow. But it was a good exhaustion, the triumphant weariness that comes at the end of a long, arduous journey. He was almost home. He was almost back to Clara. The ring in his pocket felt impossibly heavy now, a beautiful grounding weight of future and of hope. The taxi's engine idled softly as it pulled up to the curb of a quiet, tree-lined street that Caleb knew better than the veins on the back of his own hand. He paid the driver in a daze, his mind already having leaped from the car and crossed the lawn. His eyes were fixed on the small two-story house with the dark blue shutters, their home. A knot of profound, overwhelming emotion formed in his throat, making it difficult to breathe. It looked exactly as he had preserved it in his memory, a perfect, unassuming monument to the life he had left behind, a life he had clung to as a drowning man clings to a raft in his darkest moments. The old porch swing was still, hanging in the shadows. The large oak tree in the front yard, a landmark of his childhood, stood like a silent, steadfast guardian. The porch light, however, was off. This small detail pricked at his consciousness. It was unusual for Clara. She was meticulous about leaving it on for him, a symbolic beacon she had promised to keep lit, a silent vigil for his return, even though she thought he was still weeks away. He dismissed it. It was late. He checked his watch, the luminous dial glowing in the dark. Nearly 10 p.m. She was most likely asleep, lost in dreams he desperately hoped were of him. He retrieved his heavy duffel bag from the trunk, the familiar weight a strange comfort in this moment of nervous anticipation. He walked with hushed, deliberate steps up the concrete driveway. The cool, humid Ohio night air was thick with the scent of damp earth, cut grass, and the sweet perfume of late-blooming honeysuckle from a neighbor's yard, a stark, welcome contrast to the perpetual, gritty dust of the desert that had clung to everything he owned. He decided against using his key, which was tucked away deep in his wallet. The element of surprise was the entire point of this clandestine return. He wanted to see her face, to capture that perfect, unguarded moment of reunion and etch it into his memory forever, a talisman against any future darkness. He would knock, and the few seconds of her sleepy, adorable confusion would be a story they would tell their children, a cornerstone of their family lore. But as he drew near the front door, his carefully laid plan evaporated. A soft, warm light emanating from an upstairs window caught his eye. It wasn't their bedroom window. That was dark. It was the spare room, the one they had always talked about turning into a nursery one day. It was a room of potential, a repository for old furniture, boxes of books, and shared dreams. A knot of simple confusion tightened in his stomach. Why would there be a light on in there? Clara, ever practical and frugal, was a stickler for saving electricity and always chided him for leaving lights on in empty rooms. He felt a flicker of annoyance, then curiosity. Then a different idea, a more mischievous and altogether better one, bloomed in his mind, chasing away the confusion. He would sneak around to the back of the house, to the large picture window in the living room. She often read on the couch before heading to bed, a book in her lap, lost in another world. Maybe he could tap gently on the glass, give her the fright of her life before she recognized his silhouette against the dark yard. A boyish grin, the first genuine one in what felt like an eternity, touched his lips. He carefully set his duffel bag down on the manicured lawn, its soft, cool blades a welcome sensation against the rough canvas. He crept around the side of the house, his combat boots designed for traversing rocky, treacherous terrain, making almost no sound on the forgiving grass. The soldier in him was still very much alive, a creature of the shadows, moving with a practiced stealth that felt absurdly out of place in this peaceful, sleeping suburban world. He reached the large picture window, his heart thumping with a potent cocktail of love, adrenaline, and mischievous anticipation. He took a deep, steadying breath, crouched low to stay out of the light's reflection, and peered inside, ready to see the woman he loved and change both their lives forever. The world did not just stop. It detonated. It didn't slow down or fade. It fractured into a million razor-sharp, icy pieces that lanced through Caleb's soul, pinning him to the spot, a helpless specimen under a microscope. The air in his lungs solidified, turning to a block of stone he couldn't dislodge. His first sight, for a blissful, fleeting second, was of her, Clara. Through the pristine, reflective glass of their living room window, he saw her, and a wave of pure love washed over him, so potent it almost brought him to his knees. She was just as breathtakingly beautiful as he remembered, her blonde hair tied back in a loose, casual ponytail, the lamplight catching the soft curve of her cheek and turning her skin to gold. She was home. She was safe, but she was not alone. The realization did not come all at once. First, there was confusion. He saw the shape of a small back, a little body clad in brightly colored fabric. His mind, struggling to process the anomaly, offered up a dozen rationalizations. A nephew visiting? A neighbor's child she was watching for the evening? It had to be. But then she knelt, her movements full of a gentle, practiced patience, and the scene resolved itself into a portrait of such profound intimacy that it stole his breath. She was coaxing a small boy into a pair of bright red and blue Captain America pajamas. The boy, who couldn't have been more than 5 years old, had a mop of unruly brown hair and a sleepy, pouty face that was slowly breaking into a smile under her gentle ministrations. Caleb's mind, a finely tuned instrument for analysis and tactical assessment, failed utterly. It stuttered, short-circuited, refusing to compute the image. A child. There was a child in his house. A child he had never seen, never heard about, a child whose existence had never been hinted at in a single one of her meticulously crafted, loving letters. The scene was so achingly, devastatingly domestic. It was a perfect, quiet portrait of motherhood, an evening routine he had never been a part of. Clara tickled the boy's side, and a small, happy giggle, a sound that should have been joyful, echoed faintly through the double-paned glass and landed in Caleb's gut like a physical blow. She then stood up, took the boy's small hand in hers, and led him out of the living room. They disappeared down the hall, presumably towards the spare bedroom, the room with the light on, which was no longer a spare room at all. It was a child's room. The living room was now empty, a silent, warmly lit stage, but the afterimage of the boy and Clara's tender, maternal expression was burned onto Caleb's retinas with the searing, permanent finality of a branding iron. The blood drained from his face, leaving a cold, clammy emptiness in its wake, a vacuum where his heart used to be. The 15 months of profound loneliness, of gnawing fear, of dreaming of this very moment of return, all curdled into a thick black poison that flooded his system. His mind, trained to assess threats and calculate risks, could only arrive at one soul-crushing, inescapable conclusion. The timeline was an impossibility. The boy was at least 4, maybe 5 years old. This wasn't a recent secret, a mistake she had kept for a few months. This was a whole life she had been living behind his back, a life that didn't include him, a life built on her lies and his ignorance. The letters, the promises, the whispered "I love yous" over the static-filled satellite phone, had they all been a grand, elaborate performance? Was he just a fool, a decorated soldier fighting for a home that had never truly been his? The ring in his pocket now felt like a lead weight, a cold, mocking monument to his own spectacular naivety. The house, which moments ago had been a beacon of hope and belonging, now felt like a tomb, a beautifully maintained monument to his betrayal. Caleb staggered back from the window, as if he'd taken a physical blow, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated. His breath came in ragged, shallow gasps that burned his throat. He stumbled blindly away from the house, his feet moving on their own accord, carrying him away from the source of his agony. The manicured lawn, once a symbol of their shared life and future projects, now felt like a hostile, alien landscape. He collapsed onto the cold, damp grass behind the massive, familiar oak tree that bordered their property, its thick trunk hiding him from the glowing, treacherous windows of the house. The world tilted violently on its axis, and he braced a hand against the rough bark to keep from falling over. His mind was a maelstrom, a chaotic, violent whirlwind of betrayal, confusion, and a white-hot rage that threatened to consume him entirely. He pressed the heels of his hands hard into his eyes, a desperate, futile attempt to erase the image of Clara and the boy, but it was seared there, an indelible brand of infidelity. He ripped the ring box from his pocket with a convulsive, angry motion and stared at it dumbly in the pale moonlight. The soft, dark velvet felt obscene, a prop from a different play, a different, happier life that he now realized had never existed outside of his own deluded imagination. Just hours ago, this small, unassuming object had represented everything: commitment, future, family. Now it was just a symbol of his colossal, unforgivable stupidity. He almost threw it, his arm tensing to hurl it into the darkness, but some broken part of him couldn't let it go. How could he have been so blind? He tore through his memory, replaying every crackled phone call, rereading every cherished letter in his mind's eye, searching frantically for a clue, a hint, a slip-up, anything that might have warned him. There was nothing. Her words had been a seamless, perfect tapestry of deception. She had written of being lonely, of missing his touch, of counting the days, all while she was living a secret life, tucking another man's child into bed in their home. Whose child was it? The question hammered at him with the force of a battering ram, each strike another crack in his sanity. A neighbor? A co-worker from the library? A ghost from her past he never knew about? The thought made him physically sick, and he hunched over, gagging on the bile of betrayal that rose in his throat. He felt the familiar, ugly burn of adrenaline that he usually associated with the split second before an ambush, the feeling of incoming fire, but this was infinitely worse. An enemy you can see is a threat you can fight, a target you can engage. This was an attack from within, a corrosion of everything he held sacred, a betrayal that had rotted the very foundation of his world from the inside out. His thoughts, wild and untethered, drifted to his best friend Owen, who hadn't made it home. They had enlisted together, two boys from Ohio who thought they were invincible. They had fought together, slept in the same dirt, and shared the same fears under the same foreign sky. Owen had been killed by a hidden IED just 2 months ago, practically in Caleb's arms. The memory was a fresh, gaping wound, still bleeding. He remembered a night, just weeks before that, when Owen had been showing him a picture of his son, Max, his face glowing with a father's pride. "Look at him, Caleb. He's my whole world. When we get back, I'm going to teach him how to fish." And he remembered Owen talking about Clara, telling Caleb how lucky he was. "You hold on to that one, man," he'd said, his voice full of sincere, brotherly admiration. "She's the real deal. A keeper." The memory was a fresh knife twisting in the wound. He had been a laughingstock, the loyal soldier, the devoted fiancé, the punchline to a cosmic joke that everyone but him was in on. He clenched his fists until his knuckles were white, the sharp edges of gravel on the ground digging into his palms, the physical pain a welcome distraction from the inferno in his soul. The romantic desire for a quiet, loving surprise was dead, incinerated by his rage. It was replaced by a cold, hard, and absolute need for confrontation. He would not remain a ghost outside his own home. He would face her. He would demand the truth. He pushed himself to his feet, his body moving with a rigid, unnatural control that belied the chaos raging within him. The initial explosive rage had condensed, hardened. It was a cold fire now, burning away the shock and leaving a core of hardened, crystalline resolve. He wasn't going to smash his way in. He wasn't going to scream and shout and give her the satisfaction of seeing him broken. He was a soldier, a sergeant, trained in discipline under the most extreme pressure imaginable. He would approach this like a mission objective, a final, painful reconnaissance. Infiltrate, gather intelligence, confirm the target, and only then, act. He needed to be absolutely certain of what he was seeing, what he was hearing. He needed undeniable facts, not just soul-crushing assumptions, before he burned his own life to the ground. He crept back towards the house, his movements once again silent, deliberate, and predatory. His grief had been replaced by a chilling focus. He didn't go back to the large picture window this time. He moved with purpose along the side of the house, a shadow among shadows, towards the spare bedroom, the one with the soft light still glowing, a beacon of his betrayal. He noted again that the window was cracked open just an inch, a small concession to the warm, humid night air. It was enough. He positioned himself carefully below the sill, the deep shadows cast by the eaves of the roof providing perfect cover. He became part of the darkness, a silent, invisible observer, holding his breath, and he listened. Inside, the sounds were muffled but agonizingly clear. He could hear the gentle, rhythmic rustle of bedsheets being pulled up to a small chin, the faint creak of the floorboards as Clara moved. Then he heard her voice, soft and soothing, a melody of maternal love that twisted the knife in his gut. "Okay, little man, time to sleep. You have a big day tomorrow." There was a small, sleepy murmur in response from the boy, a sound of perfect trust and contentment. Caleb's jaw tightened so hard he felt a muscle cramp in his cheek. The casual, unthinking intimacy of the exchange was like a physical blow, each word a small, sharp shard of glass embedding itself in his heart. He braced himself, steeling his nerves, ready to hear her say, "I love you," to the child, a phrase that would surely shatter the last, fragile vestiges of his composure and unleash the monster he was holding back. He heard her lean in close, the sound of a gentle kiss on a forehead, a sound of pure affection, and then she whispered a good night. But it wasn't the words that made Caleb's blood run cold and his world spin off its axis, stopping his heart mid-beat. It was the name, a single name, spoken so softly, so tenderly, that it was almost carried away by the night breeze. Yet it hit him with the concussive force of a full-speed truck, a sound that rearranged reality itself. "Good night, my sweet little Owen," she whispered. "Owen." Caleb froze, every muscle in his body locking up in an instant, rigid as steel. His breath hitched in his throat. It was a phantom limb twitching, a ghost's name spoken from her lips into the quiet dark. Owen, his best friend, his fallen brother in arms. Why? The question screamed in the sudden, roaring silence of his mind. Why would she name her child, the living, breathing proof of her affair, after his dead best friend? The cruelty of it, the sheer, twisted, unimaginable audacity of such an act was beyond any human comprehension. The rage he had felt just moments before was instantly vaporized, extinguished by a wave of profound, disorienting confusion that left him dizzy and breathless. It didn't make sense. None of it made any sense at all. He sank back deeper into the shadows, his mind scrambling desperately to understand a truth that was suddenly far more complex and terrifying than simple, sordid infidelity. Owen. The name echoed in the hollow, grief-stricken chambers of Caleb's heart, a resonant, impossible chime. His mind, a tool honed by years of training to find patterns, to connect disparate pieces of information under fire, began to work frantically, sifting through a thick, suffocating haze of grief and confusion. It was like a faulty computer rebooting, trying to make sense of corrupted data. Owen. His best friend had a son. He knew that. A little boy named Max. Owen had been so proud, carrying a worn, creased photo of him in his wallet, a photo that was now burned into Caleb's memory. He had shown it to Caleb 100 times. A gap-toothed kid with the same unruly brown hair as the boy in the bedroom, the same mischievous eyes. Max, not Owen. The names were completely, utterly different. But wait. His mind reeled back, pulling a memory from the wreckage. A memory that was sharp, agonizing, and now, suddenly, illuminated. The chaos after the IED explosion, the ringing in his ears, the acrid smell of cordite, the dust so thick he could taste it. He was kneeling beside Owen on the scorched earth, his hands slick with his friend's blood, trying desperately to apply pressure to a wound that was too grievous. It was hopeless, and they both knew it. Owen's eyes were unfocused, looking at something far away, his words a desperate, ragged whisper against the cacophony of shouting medics and revving engines. "Promise me, Caleb," he had gasped, his hand clutching Caleb's arm with a surprising final strength that felt like a brand. "Promise me you'll look after him. Max, his mom, she can't." His voice had trailed off into a gurgle, his grip slackening, his eyes going vacant. Then, nothing. Caleb had been medevaced minutes later, his own shrapnel injuries in his leg and shoulders severe. He had spent weeks adrift in a military hospital in Landstuhl, Germany, lost in a surreal fog of pain, surgery, and powerful medication. By the time he was lucid and whole again, all he knew for certain was that Owen was gone, another name to be carved into the long, tragic list of the fallen. He had tried, in his own grief and confusion, to find out what happened to Owen's family, but the official channels were a bureaucratic labyrinth, slow and impersonal. He had assumed, naively, that Owen's wife, a woman he'd never met, was grieving but taking care of their son. Could it be? The pieces began to click into place, not with a gentle snap, but with the force of a tectonic shift, rearranging his entire understanding of the world. The boy was about 5, the right age for Max. Owen's dying, fragmented words about his wife. She can't. What if she couldn't handle the grief? What if, broken by her loss, she had abandoned their son? And Clara? Compassionate, kind, impossibly loyal Clara. Had she found out? Had she discovered that Owen's son, his legacy, was alone in the world? Had she stepped into the void where no one else, not even he, had been able to? The name. Why call him Owen? It wasn't his name, but maybe it was a nickname, a term of endearment, or maybe she was calling him that to honor his father, to keep his memory, his heroism, alive for him every single day. This wasn't an act of betrayal. If he was right, this was the single greatest, most selfless act of love and loyalty he had ever witnessed. It was a sacred promise that he, Owen's best friend, had been given and had been unable to keep. A promise that had been fulfilled by the woman he loved. The realization washed over him, not as a gentle wave, but as a tidal surge, a tsunami of truth that scoured away the anger, the bitterness, and the suspicion, leaving him feeling raw, exposed, and utterly, completely in awe of her. The shame of his thoughts burned hot in his chest, a self-inflicted wound far deeper than any shrapnel. He had been so wrong, so terribly, unforgivably wrong about the best person he had ever known. With tears now blurring his vision, making the world swim in and out of focus, Caleb walked out of the shadows and onto the front porch. The furious anger was gone, replaced by a humility so profound it made his knees feel weak and his body feel heavy. He felt stripped bare, his ugly, monstrous suspicions laid out for him to see, and he was disgusted with himself. He raised a trembling hand, a hand that had held a rifle for a year and a half, and knocked softly, tentatively on the front door. The simple sound seemed to echo in the silent night, a fragile signal of surrender. It felt like the most significant, most freighted action of his entire life. He heard footsteps from within, quick and light, and then the familiar, welcome sound of the deadbolt turning. The door swung open, and there she was, Clara. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, locked onto his. A hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp that was half shock, half sob. "Caleb," she breathed, his name a fragile, wondrous, impossible sound, a prayer she thought had gone unanswered for weeks to come. For a long, silent moment, they just stared at each other across the threshold, a universe of unspoken words, of fear and hope, and 15 months of longing, hanging in the heavy air between them. Then her composure shattered completely. With a cry that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief, she threw herself into his arms. She buried her face in the rough, unfamiliar material of his uniform, her body shaking with the force of her weeping. He held her tight, his own tears finally falling freely, soaking into her hair as he breathed in the familiar, comforting scent of her. "You're home," she wept into his chest, her words muffled by the fabric. "You're really, truly home." "I'm home," he whispered, his voice thick and hoarse with a storm of emotions. "I'm so sorry, Clara. I'm so sorry. I'm home." A small pajama-clad figure appeared behind Clara, peeking out from behind the safety of her legs. It was the boy, his brown eyes wide and curious, taking in the scene with a child's unfiltered gaze. Caleb's gaze met his, and his heart clenched with a powerful, painful mix of love, grief, and regret. He gently, reluctantly, disentangled himself from Clara, crouching down to the boy's level so they were eye to eye. "Clara," he said softly, his voice still unsteady, never taking his eyes off the child who looked so much like his lost friend. "I was outside. I saw, through the window. I heard you. I heard you call him Owen." Clara's face went pale, her brief joy replaced by a look of dawning horror as she saw the lingering pain in his eyes. She understood instantly the terrible, logical conclusion he must have jumped to. "Oh, Caleb, no, no, my love, it's not what you think. It was never, ever what you think." She knelt beside him on the porch, her hand finding his, her touch grounding him, pulling him back from the edge. "His name is Max, Owen. Owen was his father." And then the story poured out of her in a rush of tearful, urgent words, a dam of secrets finally breaking. She told him how she'd received a call from a distant cousin of Owen's, how she'd learned that his wife, already struggling before Owen's death, had been completely overwhelmed by grief and had surrendered Max to state child services just weeks after Owen was killed. She described the horror she felt at the thought of Owen's son, his living legacy, lost and alone in the foster care system. She had spent months navigating a bewildering legal maze, hiring a lawyer with her own savings, fighting with a tenacity she didn't know she possessed to become his legal guardian. "He asked you to look after him, Caleb," she said, her voice choked with tears, her eyes pleading with him to understand. "On that last call, you told me he made you promise. You were in the hospital and I just knew you'd want me to. I was keeping the promise for both of us. I call him my little Owen sometimes. It's silly, I know, but I just want to make sure he never, ever forgets that his dad was a hero." Caleb looked from Clara's earnest, tear-streaked face to the small, uncomprehending boy. The sheer weight of her sacrifice, the quiet, unyielding strength of her character, the impossible depth of her love, it was overwhelming. This was the woman he wanted to marry. This was the woman who had not only waited for him, but who had built a sanctuary of love, honor, and loyalty in his absence, protecting not only his heart, but the legacy of his best friend. They sat together in the living room, on the very couch he had seen from the window, the lamp casting a warm, gentle glow over them. The room that had been the stage for Caleb's deepest heartbreak just an hour earlier was now transformed into a space of quiet, sacred healing. Max, his initial shyness overcome by a sleepy curiosity about the uniformed stranger, had eventually curled up and fallen asleep, with his head in Clara's lap, his small hand still clutching her finger as if for an anchor. The house was finally, peacefully silent, save for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the soft, synchronized sound of their breathing. The silence was a balm, a gentle mending of the jagged edges of their emotions. Caleb reached into his duffel bag, which now sat by the door like a silent testament to his journey, and pulled out his worn leather wallet. From a cracked, clouded plastic sleeve, he carefully extracted a faded photograph. It was of him and Owen, taken on the tarmac just before their last deployment. They were both grinning like idiots, their faces young and full of foolish bravado, their arms slung around each other's shoulders, the very picture of youth, invincibility, and a brotherhood forged in fire. He stared at it for a long moment, the loss hitting him with a fresh, poignant ache. He gently nudged the sleeping boy. "Max," he whispered. The boy's eyes fluttered open, drowsy and unfocused. Caleb held out the picture, his hand steady now. "See this guy?" he said, his voice soft, pointing to Owen's smiling face. "That's your dad. He was my best friend. One time he tried to teach me how to fix a Jeep engine, and he ended up covering both of us in oil. He was the funniest, bravest man I ever knew, and he loved you more than anything in this whole world." Max's eyes, a perfect, startling mirror of his father's, fixed on the image. He blinked, a flicker of sleepy recognition crossing his small face. He reached out a tiny finger and gently, reverently touched Owen's smiling image. "Dad," he mumbled, the words soft and full of a child's simple, heartbreaking truth. In that single, breathtaking moment, a new family was forged. It wasn't the simple two-person family Caleb had pictured during those long, lonely nights in the desert. It was something deeper, stronger, and infinitely more profound. It was a family built not on simple plans and easy dreams, but on a foundation of unimaginable sacrifice, unbreakable loyalty, and a sacred promise kept against all odds. He looked across at Clara, who was watching him with an expression of such pure, unadulterated love that it stole the air from his lungs. Her gaze held no judgment for his earlier suspicion, only forgiveness and a deep, abiding affection. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the velvet box. He didn't need to get down on one knee. He didn't need to make a grand rehearsed speech. The moment was too real, too raw, too sacred for empty theatrics. He simply opened the box and held it out to her. The diamond caught the warm light of the lamp and scattered it into 1,000 tiny, brilliant rainbows across the room. "I came home expecting to give you this ring because you waited for me," he said, his voice thick with emotion, finally finding the right words. "But that's not why I'm giving it to you now. I'm giving it to you because while I was gone, you did something I couldn't. You saved his memory. You saved his son. You saved me from breaking the most sacred promise I ever made. You saved all of us, Clara." Her eyes filled with fresh tears, but this time they were tears of pure, radiant joy. She looked from the ring to his face, her expression a mixture of shock and overwhelming happiness. She didn't need to say yes. Her entire being, the quiet strength that had held their world together, was a yes. Caleb knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul and healed the last of his wounds, that he wasn't just back from the war. He was finally, truly, and completely home.